好，我叫 Bailey. Hello, my name is Ella. Have you ever bought something that was made in China? But did you think about the country it was made in or the people who made it? China today seems like a faraway place that manufactures a ton and doesn't have the best government, but it seems to be fine. But what do we really know about China's history? A lot of Americans don't know what's been happening there in the last 100 years. Today, I'm going to show you what the communist system looks like and how people are still affected by Chinese communism today. In 2008, my family got to travel to China. We lived there for a summer, most of the time in factory dorms. Because it wasn't just a sightseeing trip, I was able to witness a lot of the differences between their lifestyle and ours. And after thinking about them now, I'm starting to see a lot of connections between China today and its history. I think the most informative way to learn is through a story rather than a list of historical facts. So to show you the connections between the things I observed and China's history, I'm going to tell you the story of Young Cheng. She's a modern Chinese woman who wrote her family's experiences through this last century of disaster in the book Wild Swans. My story today ends with a picture of what it looks like to you or to me as an American living there now. Young Cheng's mother, Bao Jin, grew up during the time that Japanese controlled much of China. Her town was controlled by a powerful Japanese class who treated the Chinese as second-class citizens. All the schools were controlled by the Japanese. All the nice housing went to them. Even the food was confiscated and controlled by the Japanese. Bao Jin says rice was reserved for the Japanese, and the local population had to subsist on a diet of acorn meal and sorghum, which were very difficult to digest. As a result, many people starved. In 1945, Bao Jin heard that the soldiers under Chiang Kai-shek had defeated the Japanese, and those upper-class Japanese in her town were killed, committed suicide, or went into hiding. The victors called themselves the Chinese National Army, so naturally, Bao Jin and those around her thought they had been delivered. But the Chinese National Army never appeared in her town. Instead, 3 months later, Russian soldiers moved in who were worse than the Japanese. They looted, raped, and stole. Bao Jin had to smear dirt on her face when going out, so she would look too ugly to be abducted by the soldiers. But after only a few weeks, the Russian soldiers were replaced by a small group called the Chinese Communists. The communist strategy was to win the hearts of the people by treating them well and giving them food. To Bao Jin, this seems like a great organization, because she was comparing them to the Japanese and Russians. Author Amy Tan tells a Chinese saying, "If you can't change your fate, change your attitude." Bao Jin and those around her tried to have a positive attitude towards her new situation. Bao Jin joined the communists when she was 17 and became part of the communist system. The way the system worked was that you start low and work up through 21 levels. The higher the level, the better the houses, better the food, maybe the car. Soon after she joined the communist system, also known as the party, she met a high communist official and fell in love. They were married, but not with the traditional huge ceremony. Bao Jin got a note while she was in a meeting that they had gotten permission from the party to be married. So she left the meeting and got married, wearing her everyday communist uniform. The birth of a family was secondary to the party. If you were part of the party, you had to ask permission to do anything. Bao Jin says the need to obtain authorization for an unspecified anything was to become a fundamental element in Chinese communist rule. It also meant that people were not to take any action on their own initiative. During this, Bao Jin and her husband went on a 1,000-mile journey to Nanjing. Bao Jin had to walk all the way there. Because she joined the communists several years after her husband did, they were on different levels in the system. And while he had a nice apartment, Bao Jin wasn't even allowed to live with her husband. And even when she was pregnant, she was forced to walk cross-country while he rode in his car. He might have been allowed to give her a ride, but that'd be showing favoritism to his family. He wouldn't even take her bedroll in his car. He made her carry it. From Bao Jin's point of view, he didn't care about her at all. And this really damaged their relationship as a family. During this, Bao Jin had 4 children, the second being the author Young Cheng. Young Cheng was 14 when the Cultural Revolution really began in 1966. Mao Zedong, the communist leader, moved in on the media, calling for establishing Chairman Mao's absolute authority and sweeping away all the class enemies. During this, groups that called themselves the Red Guards began to pop up. The Red Guards were officials' teenage children who acted as shock troops for Mao. Mao could see that the people were not responding to his repeated calls to attack the capitalist voters, so he told the students to smash up the four olds, defined as old ideas, old customs, old culture, and old habits. Obeying this, the Red Guards raided people's houses, smashed antiques, tore up paintings, and burnt books. Young Chang was part of it all. She had to be a Red Guard, or she'd be labeled a rightist. So she found less cruel jobs like stopping people and cutting their hair, and removing signs of bourgeois decadence. No one was allowed to wear bright-colored clothes or long hair, and the Red Guards enforced these rules. The people were forcibly trained to fit in. While Young Chang was out there trying hard to look supportive of Mao with the Red Guards, her parents started being accused of being rightists. There was no real reason to accuse them, but as the Chinese saying goes, where there is a will to condemn, there is evidence. Anyone who ever had a grudge against them could accuse them of anything, even simply wearing the wrong thing. Because there was no way to argue against the stories, Young Chang's parents, Bao Jin and her husband, ended up being sent to work camps for several years. While they were there, Young Chang and her siblings were constantly visiting them and bringing them food. According to her mother, Bao Jin, it was their visits that kept her alive. They were released in 1972 after being in the camps for 3 years. It was then when the communist grip finally began to loosen. Mao Zedong died in 1976, and China began to open up again. Young Chang was able to go back to school and even won a competition for a scholarship to go to school in Britain. She graduated in Britain and decided to continue living there. It was then when she decided to write the book Wild Swans. While I was living in China, our family was struck by the differences in their culture and ours. The two things that really stood out to me were what they wear and their family life. I'm going to show you how I think they connect to Chinese communism. The first thing I noticed was what they wear. I would look out on the street and see a whole group of people wearing the exact same thing. Maybe a blue shirt, red scarf, and jeans. Versus in America, when we're told to match, such as a uniform, we don't like to match exactly. We add a necklace or jacket or roll up the sleeves. In China, it's cool to totally match. Remember how the society had been forcibly trained to blend in completely during the revolution? Years of watching people accused and punished for standing out at all taught the country to value fitting in, and you can see that just by driving down the streets today. The second thing I noticed was that their family life is totally different because their parents almost always lived away from their kids. In America, though we have many bad family situations, we are way better off than Chinese. In China, it is very uncommon for parents and kids to live together. Usually the children are handed over to the grandparents. There was one lady at the dorms we stayed in who lived 10 hours drive away from her daughter. Another reference lived just half an hour away from her daughter, but they only saw her on the weekends. Unfortunately, this is the case for many families in China. But this seems like close family ties compared to the complete lack of family unity during the years when the party had to come before everything else. They are still recovering from Mao's attempted destruction of normal family life. We have just gone over the conflict between Japan and China, the communist takeover, what the communist system looks like, and what the people are going through all of this. We've also looked at some of the roots of the cultural differences I witnessed while we were there. Although no cultural phenomenon can be explained through a single cause, I believe the history we just covered greatly factors into the differences between China and America and what they wear in their family life through what I saw. Communist control over the Chinese population ruined millions of lives, such as Young Chang's and her family's. Although China is doing way better, the communists are still in charge, and we need to remember that it's not just something that happened a long time ago. As I saw in China, people are still very affected by their history. I hope today you go home with more knowledge of what is going on, and with this insight into China's painful history, maybe when you see Made in China, it will make you think more about the lives of the people who made it and what they have been through. 谢谢. Thank you.